Hello everybody and welcome to the latest HQM virtual roundtable. My name is Bobby Huff and I'm MD at Huff Bellis Communications and I'm an associate with HQM. Today we're going to be chatting about the future of the workplace and since lockdown, lots of us have been thinking about what our organisations might look like once COVID has passed. Lots of us already had significant transformation plans before COVID, but the pandemic has truncated those into, in some cases, a couple of weeks. Now, I guess what we've got to decide is where do we go from here and what the future looks like. Do we embrace some of the new ways of working that we've all had to adopt over the last 10 months, or do we move back to those tried and tested working practices that frankly a lot of staff are missing? What the staff and tenants telling our organisations. Crucially, I think, is what is an acceptable pace of change going forward. I think we have a lot of stuff to catch up on to where we are as organisations. We've missed sort of 10 months because of the pandemic. Today I've got a really brilliant panel. I'm sure it's going to be a lively debate. We've got Nick Atkin, who's CEO of Yorkshire Housing, Executive Director of ICT, Data and Digital Transformation at Johnny Johnson, Jamie Ratcliffe, Executive Director of Business Performance and Partnerships at Network Homes, Siobhan Fitzgerald, who's a partner at the law firm TLT, Andy Gay, Executive Director of Growth at Moscare St Vincent, and Jane Acton of Who Consulting. Thanks everybody for joining us. Nick, can I come to you first, and can you just outline some of the things you've been thinking about over the last 10 months since lockdown, about what that's meant for Yorkshire Housing and what it's going to mean for the future of your organisation and the way that you run the business?
Sure, thanks Bobby, and thanks for inviting me along today as well to be part of the panel. I think what lockdown did, you've got to take any positives you can from something as dramatically challenging as the pandemic has been, and I do think that one of the big positives in that is it supercharged the whole debate around how people work, where people work, when people work. But I think possibly the debate has been a bit too skewed around employees, and whilst that's really important, I think we're missing a bit of a trick in terms of how we can all work differently in a different way, but to provide a much better, completely enhanced customer service. Because I think one of the other things that's come out of the last few months has been a clear shift in customer expectations as well, in terms of from all service providers, not just landlords. But certainly in terms of the workplace view, I think that for Yorkshire Housing, this has just accelerated where we have planned to be in 2023. So we moved basically in the first 6 weeks of the lockdown to work in. We moved forward in the space of 6 weeks, 3 years. So the problem with that is that we've had to take some of our colleagues with us, because clearly they got transferred. It's a bit like them getting into the TARDIS and sort of ending up 3 years ahead. And we've had to explain to them that the world's changed and that things are different. But I think what has definitely emerged over the last sort of 6 months has been that focus, and that impetus has changed. That is now coming from our colleagues. Our colleagues are clearly saying to us, we do not and we will not, interestingly, go back to the way things were. We will not spend a fortune commuting on a dirty, late, overpriced TransPennine or other train provider service stuck under somebody's armpit, when actually I've got a choice in terms of where I work, when and how I work, and that has been proven to be completely sustainable. And all the things that we were told couldn't be done suddenly have become the norm. And I think really the final one for me is that if you think about where we're heading, we're probably going to be in some form of lockdown arrangements until Easter. And by that point, people will have worked in a very different way for in excess of 12 months. And I think psychologically, that's a tipping point for people. People will no longer go back to the way things were. In terms of our approach is threefold. It's a combination, it's a blended approach of hub. So we will have community-based hubs. home at a time that works for people, and also Rome. And before any of my colleagues get excited, I don't mean Rome in Italy. I mean Rome as in roaming around. But actually, it's a bit, it reflects the fact that we work over a large patch. Yorkshire's 100 miles north to south and 100 miles east to west. So it's about that whole concept of being able to work a bit like Martini, anytime, any place, anywhere.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Nick. And yeah, there's a huge amount to unpick in that, which we'll come back to, I'm sure. Steve, you're relatively new to the housing sector, and you sort of landed just as the first lockdown was happening, so you've timed that perfectly.
Yeah.
You've led quite a significant period of change at Johnny Johnson, haven't you, which I know you've been sort of out talking to people about over the last few months. Could you just outline the approach that you've taken and you know, how that's pieced together over the last 10 months?
Yeah, sure, Bobby. Yeah, nice to meet everybody. Appreciate being on the panel. What you've said then, it really resonates from a Johnny Johnson perspective. You know, we've been through very similar circumstances. We've wanted to be what they call agile working for quite a few years, but we've needed people, systems, and the environment to be in the right place at the right time to be able to make that work. And I completely agree with the notion that as horrendous as this pandemic has been for everybody, there are some positives that have come from it. One of which being the move to this hybrid flexible working model. And what we found, actually, we've probably surveyed our colleagues a bit too much, to be honest, but we've made sure we've been really open and honest from a top-down perspective with our colleagues to say, look, we're in a really fortunate position here where we're working very differently to how we've ever worked before. We've had to help colleagues, we've had to upgrade their kits, we've had to give them some training and development, we've had to bend ourselves out of shape and work in a very different way to be able to survive through lockdown. But we've taken colleagues on that journey with us. We've basically listened to them. We've ensured that actually, when we package this up as a brand, which is My Futures, we made sure it was a bottom to top directive. This wasn't a case of the board and the exec telling colleagues, this is what we're going to do. We actually gave them the power and permission to come up with our target operating model for the future themselves, and to feed that back up to the exec and to the board, which I think landed incredibly well with people. I think they felt that they were empowered to create new ideas. What we're doing is we've moved away from the traditional office. We've taken quite the bold step to effectively decommission our head office in Poynton, and we've created, and it's all up and ready. It's good to go, bar lockdown. But we've created a new, what we've called an innovation hub, where instead of colleagues coming and working 9 to 5 at a desk, it's just a collaboration space. It's somewhere that colleagues can come and have those face-to-face discussions that sometimes are better face-to-face, because we know virtual working has lots of benefits, but there is nothing quite like being in a room with people for particular pieces of work. So we've created that hybrid flexible model. We were due to launch that incidentally this week. We were going to be inviting all of our colleagues into our new hub as of Monday. And of course, we are where we are with the lockdown. So, which is fine, because what it's enabled us to do is just make sure that the hub is completely COVID compliant. We've done various stress tests to make sure that anyone coming into that hub is safe and we're not going to compromise anybody. I think the really interesting thing for us now, about, you know, taking away the technology and the digital skills, and the really interesting part we're at now is people tend to focus on a binary, it's got to be this or this. I've got to work at home or I work from an office. And what we're now starting to say to colleagues is, you don't have to work, if you're having a meeting, you don't have to have a video call. You could do a walk and talk, you know, go and stretch your legs, get some fresh air, pick up the phone and speak to people, rather than having to have these, you know, Zoom or Microsoft Team meetings. Because I think that's a real challenge for people at the minute. People are feeling a little bit deflated. We've started the new year. It was meant to be this big, you know, light at the end of the tunnel, and then we've all gone back into lockdown. So we're very mindful that health and well-being is being severely compromised at the minute because of the national picture. But what we're saying to colleagues is, in the true style of being a flexible hybrid, flexible company, we encourage colleagues to get up, to go and work wherever they feel comfortable. That doesn't have to be at home. It can be literally from anywhere, wherever they feel productive. And to find different ways to have conversations rather than just on Zoom or on Microsoft Teams. And that seems to be landing quite well with colleagues. I think they're now starting to get that concept. But generally speaking, our colleagues have been really, really supportive throughout this whole thing. And similar to Nick, they've all said they don't want to go back to working in the office 9 to 5, clocking up travel costs and battling through rush hour. They welcome the fact that they can work in a more flexible way. What we're trying to do with colleagues is just get them to understand that they're empowered to manage themselves. They don't have to seek permission. And that's the kind of cultural shift that we're trying to get our colleagues to understand.
Thanks so much, Steve. Again, I think there's lots of stuff in there, particular piece at the end there that I'd like to come back to around that empowering staff and colleagues and that cultural shift, which Nick touched on as well. Jamie, can we come to you next? I know that you wrote a piece towards the back end of last year. I'm not sure if we say it was championing the office, but making sure that we don't forget the benefits of the office. I'm really keen to sort of hear your take on where we're at and where you're taking your organisation.
Thanks very much, Bobby. Yeah, and I think the first thing I'd say is just that this isn't a binary debate of people that want to be working in the office full time or people that don't want an office at all. Actually, probably the bandwidth of what we'll discuss is relatively narrow. But as I think probably the most pro-office voice here, I'll try and push that a little bit to make the debate a bit more interesting and generate some different perspectives. So I was just going to briefly talk about what Network did and where we think we're going in future. Before that, I'd just sort of echo what Nick said about the most important thing being residents and what they need in terms of services. And one of the things that I think was negative across the sector was the fact that almost everybody moved to emergency only repairs during the first lockdown. That clearly isn't something anyone wants to continue or could continue for a length of time. And as of today, we're still maintaining full repairs service, but monitoring sickness and isolation levels in operatives very closely. And so in terms of what Network did, on one hand, I think we did really well, that we'd already rolled out flexible working kit, laptops for everybody, all the tools that support it in April 2019. So we'd had almost a year of using it. So people were pretty used to that. We did a dry run in mid-March of everybody working from home to load test and see how things would be different. And we actually found when we went to the IT guys afterwards and said, oh, how was it? How are people logged in from different places? And they said, well, it is exactly the same wherever you're logged in. It doesn't make any load difference. You can't even tell where people are. So we wondered, why had we tried that? And so that meant we just gave everybody an extra day of working from home when they were going to be stuck at home for the next year anyway. But nobody's complained about that. But on the other hand, it has been massively challenging for some people. And I think it's clear, some of the things that have been said, that lockdown has been a diversive experience. Some people have had more time to bake sourdough, learn new skills, and other people have really struggled. And I don't think enough voice in it, the debate has been given to the people that have really struggled. A large part of that struggle, I think, are people who haven't had the space to work effectively from home. Some of it's also caring responsibilities. And I think that just really enhances our mission as a provider of affordable homes, quality homes. And so I think that's sort of an important thing. But overall, in terms of what we did in response to that, is that we also probably over-surveyed people like Steve, but we heard that there were people who were struggling with space, caring responsibilities, loneliness, mental health issues. And so from about May, we started to allow people who wanted to and couldn't work effectively from home to come back into the office. And that started with a trickle, but started to turn into more of a stream when we moved to some new offices, which had been designed for flexible working and as kind of follow on from the tech rollout a year before in July. And kind of, yeah, as a housing association, there's some things that we need to physically do. And there's also lots of interactions where residents rightly want particularly sensitive things, some kind of face-to-face contact. So from August, we started to rota some frontline staff back into the office. But we were clear that overall we're based in our community and we don't want to create two cultures. So from September, we asked all staff across all back office functions to come into the office 2 days a week. We'd already made the offices COVID secure with various safety measures, which everyone's used to, so I'm not going to talk through. And also for people that had concerns, we carried out risk assessments based on the Public Health England advice on people who had greater risks, kind of scored that and talked through what we could do. And almost everybody was kind of reassured by that combination of things. And just being back in the office at that time when we were starting to get a bit more of a buzz was massively energizing. You saw people who I would think weren't people, just like massively energized by seeing people they hadn't seen for a while and starting to get a bit more of a buzz and sort of accidental contact happening. And I think that was really great. Unfortunately, mid-September, the guidance changed again, and we felt we couldn't ask people to come in and left it more up to people. So, and from then on, up until actually whenever it was Monday, the 5th of January, we basically told people what the advice was, and the words have changed from work effectively, kind of unreasonable, to whatever it was. Said, this is the guidance, you decide for yourself. The office is safe. If you can't do whatever that is effectively, you can come in, and whether that's for a task, for a day, to break up your week, we trust you to make that decision for you to be effective. And some people have really enjoyed that, but the numbers have been trickling down. I was in the office on Tuesday to sign some documents. We had 4 people there out of on a floor for 200, so it's pretty minimal numbers now. We'd got over 100 just before the last announcement. Briefly, just in terms of where we're going, we're very deliberately not setting an end state of, we know this is what's going to happen in the future. It's going to be some kind of blend. It's going to involve working flexibly with the kit, which has probably taken more of a hammering than we expected it to. Certainly lots of people's laptops are getting very noisy in Teams meetings at the moment from being abused in long days. But it is going to be consistent across the organisation. We're clear on that. I think it's going to involve more than 2 days a week working in the office. And I think it's not just that energy you get from seeing people. It's not the creativity and collaboration. I agree with Steve's really important. But there's also something about the chance encounters you get when you've got enough people around and you can shortcut things, or you hear that other people are doing things. And there might be ways of curating that. But I think probably it will mean just getting people in a bit more than they strictly need to in order to sort of encourage that stuff to happen. And the other thing that we're very clear in terms of how we're going to know where we're going is by, we want to be using our data much more. And we've put a lot more focus on productivity measures and understanding who can do effectively what in what place. And part of that was we were already doing it. And part of it was driven by, we didn't want to furlough anybody, and we haven't furloughed anybody. So where there were people who couldn't work effectively from home in the first lockdown, we were sort of identifying those and redeploying them into other tasks, like calling vulnerable residents, to make sure that we were getting the most from people. And we want to do much more in terms of being able to understand richly what people are doing and use that as a compass to guide where we're going to go in the future. I think we're also going to see a lot more people working out in the communities, on our schemes, on our estates, whether they're frontline staff or back office staff. And I think that will help to create this greater focus on residents.
Thanks so much for that, Jamie. It's a really interesting take, and there's a couple of things I'd really like to go back and explore with you for this. That notion that you talked about not wanting to create two cultures. I think everybody who's spoken so far has mentioned the word culture and how important that's going to be. So I think it's something definitely we need to go back and explore. And those chance encounters, we call them the water cooler moments. How do we replicate that? Because that's a lot of where business happens, doesn't it? So how do you capture that in a virtual world or a remote world? Thanks again, Jamie. That's brilliant. Siobhan, can we come to yourself next? I think you've got a unique perspective from a legal firm, in that you get a view across the sector. What sort of conversations have you been having with clients over the last 10 months. I'd be really interested to understand how they might have changed over time.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Bobby, and very nice to be here, and very interesting already to hear from Jamie, Steve and Nick. I mean, I'm in a slightly different position, so not coming from one particular housing association, but advising lots of housing associations across the board. So, you know, what you have said so far does reflect what I am hearing, but I'm probably also attending partly with my TLT hat on, because, you know, I'm a partner at TLT. You know, we are like you, you know, although we're the legal sector, we do need to think about all of these issues for our own colleagues as well. So it's very much a sort of everyone's in it together, really, to see what the future is going to look like. I have always found the Housing Association actually to be really progressive, and it's probably reflected in what some of you have said, that it's not that COVID has suddenly changed things and now we're doing it very differently. It's that these things were already starting to happen and COVID has accelerated it. And, you know, long before COVID, I was having conversations with, you know, chief execs of housing associations or HR directors about promoting flexible working, about this sort of idea of output-based contracts, you know, sort of trying to move away from that idea that, well, if you're not on the chair between 9 to 5, you know, you're not doing a good job. You know, maybe some people can do their job much more efficiently in different places, or actually a lot quicker. And therefore, you know, does that mean that they are penalised, you know, if they, you know, aren't actually physically in a place or working a particular number of hours? And, you know, there's lots of interesting sort of employment law angles around that and how you reward employees as well. But there's a few particular things that I think would be really interesting to bring to the discussion today, and which I have talked to people about. And one has been sort of mentioned before, which is around employee well-being. So obviously, we know that as employers, everybody has a duty of care towards the employees, you know, in terms of obviously health and safety, but, you know, also not overloading people with work. And, you know, we've always talked for years about the sort of work-life balance. And I think now that the sort of buzzword is the work-life blur. You know, so it's all well and good that, you know, you can send flexibility to jump into your spare room like I am here and send emails early morning or late at night. But, you know, where's that sort of mark between work and home? And, you know, if that suddenly is constantly blurred, you know, how does that impact upon employees' well-being and that sort of ability to switch off? You know, and I think that leads on to, for managers, a need for, you know, new management techniques to be adopted, because you're no longer sort of sitting beside someone and can sort of see when they begin to look a bit down, or you can tell sometimes, you know, you recall in the office days that someone's looking increasingly stressed and you can sort of step in to help. But, you know, how does that work in the remote world? You know, I think it's a bit more of a sort of a bit more nuanced, and it just requires more proactivity on the part of managers as well. And so a second one is around employee monitoring. So this is sort of almost the other side of the coin. So yes, you know, we obviously want to have trust in our employees to do work, but, you know, we are an employer and we know that not everybody always works efficiently and properly all of the time. And, you know, you've probably seen some of this, but there's increasingly, you know, software out there that monitors what employees are doing. And you've probably seen some of this, you know, you can get software that monitors keystrokes or how quickly emails come in and how quickly they're responded to, or even you can get software that takes photographs at points of employees during the day to see what they're doing. And you can imagine there is lots of issues, legal issues around that sort of stuff. You know, are you data protection side of things, you know, which I think is going to be increasingly important as both these things become more important for employers, but also technology ever improves. And final thing from me, and I'm sorry to be a boring lawyer, but it is obviously important to have your house in order as regards sort of policies and procedures and things. And I know that this is the slightly more boring side, but if you ever get to an employment tribunal, you know, that's the first thing they look for, you know, is it clear to employees what they need to do? And we're all working in a new way. So, you know, for home workers, you know, what are the requirements? Are there risk assessments around where people are working? You know, if people are out working, you know, on, for example, you know, with your tenants or on estates, you know, where health and safety side of things, where can they go to the toilet? You know, where can they have lunch? You know, has that all been risk assessed? And we're seeing those sorts of things ever more being raised. I don't know if any of you are lucky enough to have a recognised trade union, but we're seeing the unions getting much more hot on that, particularly in the housing sector. And I've had stuff, you know, coming through on that even this week from clients. So yeah, I think it's just a little bit of thinking more about the relevant systems. The employment tribunals have been quite lenient with employers up, for the last few months, because they realised everybody's thrown into this, and it's you're sort of firefighting. But I think as time goes on, the sort of excuse of this all being a big shock is leaving us. So I think that we are going to have to make sure that things are in place.
So that's really, really interesting. And just before we move on, I just wanted to pick up on a few things there, because I think it would be interesting to get a view from the room, as it were. But employee monitoring, is anybody from the housing association, is that something that they're considering?
So I guess that comes into the productivity monitoring that I was talking about, and we haven't. I read about an architect's practice that had everyone's webcams turned on all the time and then recorded it all. And we're not doing stuff like that, or keystrokes, but trying to understand what's the best way of seeing where people are effective in different places. We did have a conversation the other day about kind of people's expectations of privacy around emails, and how it's a bit it's interesting of how that's evolved and where it's came from, and looking back to the way things would have worked before emails, where all your posts would come in, be sort of seen by whoever's passing it around, be very visibly in your inbox, and what you're doing being very visible in your outbox. And the technology has completely changed that culture, and I'm too young to remember what it was like then, but we had a bit of an interesting discussion on how those expectations changed over time, and what people's expectations are to privacy in their emails, but not sort of doing anything particularly with it yet.
I think it feels very Big Brother-esque, doesn't it, to be monitoring people in quite an intrusive way like that. I think what we're trying to do is, through the rollout of Microsoft Teams and the whole variety of different apps that are available through that, we're finding that is proving to be a really good platform for monitoring productivity. If you're getting teams to work on Microsoft Planner, you're getting teams to drive a lot of their documents and their debates and conversations through Microsoft Teams, then it's pretty evident and visible what people are doing. And that's all about providing leadership within the business, the necessary tools to be able to manage and oversee the work that's being done, whilst also being really mindful about the health and well-being aspects that we've talked about. How can you support colleagues when you're not physically with them? But yeah, we're finding that there are tools and technologies out there that you can use to get your team working in a more virtual, collaborative way that gives us peace of mind that productivity is where it needs to be, without actually stalking people or having to put monitoring and recording in place. I don't think our colleagues would be very happy with that.
No, and I think you're absolutely right about the Big Brother-esque. It's I can see people sort of going, no, that sounds awful, and I do agree with that. But I suppose employee monitoring, there is a line, isn't there? At some point, we do need to know what employees are doing. It sort of strikes me that it makes that role of line manager become ever more important. So the manager ultimately is the one that knows what people are doing and how effective they are. And, if that person isn't doing their job well, then that line of visibility sort of goes away. So, yeah, I think that, maybe a bit more training for that individual or focus on what their role actually is could become ever more important.
I would ask the question though about, what's the difference between working from home and working in an office? When someone's working or not working, plain and simple. You should do, if you're a decent line manager or a decent leader. So for me, it's that bit of, whether they're in an office space, sat at a desk, sat in front of you or sat next to you, or working from home, when productivity is good and when it's bad, what their expected output should be. So monitoring for me isn't even a thought process, because you should know that already. As I say, I think we're trying to create problems or create issues from working from home that already existed in the office place. Under productivity, it was always there. For certain staff, we've all had staff, I assume, in the past that we've had challenges with in terms of what they did. It's the same for here. I think we're trying to mix something here. That for me anyway. And from MSV's perspective, I don't think there's anything we're looking at. And as I say, it's no different to working in any other office environment or any other environment than working from home.
I think that's right, that it was a challenge that was there before, but that doesn't mean that it's not something you want to focus on. And there's now kind of a sort of in our story a chance to double down and focus on that, and like how can we really use rich data to understand where people are most effective, how we can put resources into teams that are under pressure, how we can move things around. And I think we've got some parts of our business are really, really good at that. Some are less so. I think we found planners really good for teams that aren't proactive in terms of can plan out their work over a period of time. For teams that are reactive and responsive to things coming in, it doesn't work as well. And so I think it's trying to learn in different places.
It's also a culture aspect to this, though, isn't there? It's about your culture of your business, because the culture at MSV is all about trust and caring for others. And the trust element, if it's there, is that you trust people to get on with things, pure and simple. And that to me is the end of the story. As long as that culture's there, and our different sectors and different companies have different cultures, but if you've got a deeply embedded culture where you trust people and trust people to get on with things when they can, do what they can when they can, I think you look at things in a different way. You're looking at things now from more of a well-being approach rather than just on productivity. But the people will. I just think it's for me it's a bit of a strange one, but that's probably because of the culture we've got at MSV. And Nick, we've probably learned a lot from you guys over the past few years. I don't know what your views are on it, but I just don't see what the issue here is with monitoring people. I don't get it. Sorry for this. And sorry, maybe it's just me not being in the right business, in the right sector. So I'm not belittling what we're saying here. It's just I don't get what we're asking this question for.
I'm just Jane as it's focused. I'll try and be brief. So sorry, Jake. I do want to hear what you've got to say. But I think from my perspective, I think this is probably the nub of the issue on the future of work, because I think psychologically, most organisations have a very paternalistic processes in place in terms of the culture of their organisation. They probably don't recognise it, but most employers treat their employees like children and then get really grumpy with them when they act like children, when they have a bit of a temper tantrum or they're not happy about stuff. And that, if you look at lots and lots of the things that we have in place, we have policies and processes to tell people how to do stuff or what not to do, when they can do it, when they can't. And actually, if you take it all back, and why was the 9 to 5 first created? And lots of sort of different reasons behind it, but Henry Ford is sort of muted as in 1926 as being the architect of the 9 to 5 to basically make the Ford Model T production line more efficient. And then that transposed to the fact that offices were a place where people communicated and exchanged information predominantly through pen and ink. But we've moved on from that, and I do think there's a psychological point here for organisations around really just treating people like grown-up adults and letting them and empowering them. And I think this is really difficult. So when I talked before about us having moved forward, like in a TARDIS, 3 years in the space of a few weeks, it's been really difficult for all of our people at all levels to get this notion of, actually, I don't need to work 9 to 5. I've been given a clear set of objectives. I know what I need to deliver. As a grown-up adult human being, I'll then work out how best to deliver that. And that's how the business will know if I'm delivering or not. I don't give a toss when people work, where people work, or how they do it, as long as they deliver the outcomes that we've agreed with them. And as human beings, we operate, this is about getting the most out of people. And as human beings, we operate our optimum at different parts of the day. I'm a morning person, so I'm on a downward slope, I'm afraid. I'll be no good in about half an hour. But I know there are some of my colleagues who are night owls, and they only really start to come to life about 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. So why do I organise a 8:30 meeting with them? I'm not going to get the best out of them. It's a complete waste of time. And also, if I want to get the best out of people, but also want to widen the service offer that Jamie was talking about, then actually I don't need to pay people to work outside 9 to 5. Actually, I can just say to people, as a team, self-select. So our contact centre, they know the hours that we need to provide services. They know what the peaks and troughs are. We just say to them, well, self-select who's going to cover. how that works best for you with caring responsibilities and all the other things that we have going on in our lives. And I do genuinely believe that coming out of this, we will get to a point where people will choose who they work for, not just based on salary, but actually on what the wider offer is from that employer. And certainly that's what's driving part of our strategy on this, which is that this is not only about how we recruit really good people, but also how we retain them. Because, you know, those moments when they are tempted away to go and join Andy or Steve or Jamie or Jane or Siobhan, you know, they will go and experience a different setup. It might be right for them, it might not, but actually it might make them value what they've got and actually reinforce the fact that they're happy where they are and they want to deliver even more. So I think for me, this is the real nub of this is really, really, for me, the key point. We've all got to shift, because I think we are living through a point in time that is a revolution. I've got 3 kids, hate them all. They're all sort of 17, 19, 25, that's why I hate them. But, you know, they speak to me about the life before the internet. Like, and they said, well, how did you find out anything? How did you know anything? How did you contact anybody? And actually what happened was the internet came in over what, 5-8 year period. What we are experiencing now is a revolution in how people work, which is coming in the space of a few weeks. So it's not surprising that as humans, we're really struggling with shifting our mindset in terms of the opportunities that this provides. But I do genuinely believe, and I will stop here, sorry, Jane, but I do genuinely believe that our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren will look back and go, God, Grandad Nick, he lived through that. What was it like, Grandad, you know, to live through that amazing point in time? And I don't think we necessarily are fully realising the magnitude of what's happening around us at the moment.
I think that's so well put, Nick. And again, if we do get time, I'd really like to come back on that high trust, low trust environment that we're talking about, because I think from our business, even that's what we've found, that we really offer a really sort of high trust environment. But for employees coming into our company, they sort of struggle with that, to adapt to that, you know, they don't get it. It almost feels too good to be true, that it's, you know, it's fine, you go and work where you want. You don't need to ring me to tell me you're going to the shop or the dentist or whatnot. You know, it is fine. So it is going to take some getting used to. And I think you're spot on. We'll look back at this time and it will be a bit of a marker in history. Andy,
Bobby, could I just very quickly just come back on one thing Nick said, and it might set it in context for Andy more of just, I think Nick's exactly right, that kind of what performance is about setting very clear objectives that are the right objectives and being able to monitor them where people are achieving them, giving them praise or supporting them to achieve them. But it's that monitoring of how do you know what people are performing is, I think, what we're talking about. And I don't think there's anyone, like, certainly across the housing sector, that has got brilliant performance metrics, which means they can drill that back to how effective are individual people being. And I think that's where you want to get to. And that's the drive of how is it that you measure performance and monitor it and understand it in a way that actually translates into your business, because it should be the good objectives that you've set people and not kind of spurious ones.
Thank you, Jane.
Sorry,
Steve. Sorry, Nick, go on.
Absolutely, I think, but my other point I forgot to mention was that we put in place controls and checks and balances because we're worried about probably the 0.3% of our employee workforce who abuse that process. So we hack off 99.7% of our colleagues because of the perceived or in some cases real actions of 0.3%. For me, by resetting the relationship with your colleagues to an adult to adult relationship, you just deal with the 0.3%. And we know that isn't always the case, that doesn't always happen. But for me, this has also been about reversing the way that we think and enable people to do what they need to do, and then to deal with quite quickly and quite firmly, I'd suggest, the very small majority who, yes, will abuse these systems and processes. And I think Andy also said a good manager knows who's performing in their team anyway. They don't need a load of performance metrics, and they also know where the problems are.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Jamie. Andy, can I just come to you? And obviously, you guys at Moscow St Vincent. As you've said, there's been a big focus on culture there. I think you've talked about some of that already. Can you just set out where your organisation's going? Because I know you've been sort of a driver in that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try not to repeat what others have said and just try and focus on some of the other areas. But I suppose just to start off with, I think we were very well placed for lockdown, if you can call it well placed. We already had Agile kit rolled out. We had a good infrastructure for ICT already improved because we merged a few years ago. So we had to do a lot of integration work, which basically just meant we just rebuilt everything just for ease, I think. So we were well placed. We had staff who were working 2-3 days in the office, 2-3 days at home. So when lockdown hit, it was obviously a bit of a surprise, and we still had things like Teams ready to roll out. We hadn't implemented it yet, so I think we implemented it in 4 days. So we literally went from 1 day working in the office, and we were all crouched around one mobile phone on a conference call, to 4 days later being at home on Teams, and it was actually working, which was credit to our ICT team, and we were lucky it went that easy. I think when we hear what others' experiences were, but we had a transformation plan in place. Obviously, it didn't take into account any of the priorities that were going to come our way during lockdown, but we were flexible enough and adapted to the situation, and we changed our priorities around very, very quickly. So we looked at how we enhanced Teams, not just implemented it, but enhanced the services, keep the system simple, because we went through a process, like a lot of people did, of all of a sudden you had an old phone system, you had Teams, you had phones on Teams, then you had emails, Outlook, and you had conversations going on, and everyone was just getting overwhelmed with like 5 or 6 different areas of software going off, and on top of that, WhatsApp groups with Charlie Myther every 5 minutes, obviously. So, you know, we had to work on reducing that sort of stress, and just shutting down some of the old systems, which again was a big shock to some people. But I think, like Nick said, it was like a supercharged transformation program. You know, you literally just did all those things you were wishing to do over 3 years and thinking in your head, jeepers, this is going to be a challenge with some of our staff. You know, even though the culture's there, it's still going to be a bit of a bind. And actually, people were crying out within a few weeks going, well, how do we do this? How do we do that? And so, you know, we just went through, we implemented income analytics, I think, in about 6 weeks, which was unheard of compared to our previous project plan of about, I wouldn't say 6 years, that's probably exaggerating, but you know, I mean, the extremes, I think, of what we were planning, and then reality of what we could do in this situation. It just showed what we could do. We enhanced a lot of our systems, as I say, digital lettings, digital sales, a lot of what you guys have done. One of the things I would say, I suppose, is the bit of the focus for us was on the well-being of staff and how we settled them into this sort of shock situation. So I'll probably just focus a little bit on that rather than repeat what others have said. So we really invested early doors in home working kit for staff. So we realised this is going to be it for a while, and also our long-term plans will obviously work into a more flexible future anyway. So we invested in, although they had laptops, we brought forward our laptop renewal program and just issued new laptops through couriers. We put new software on there, so it was the latest cyber security on there. It was software that allowed updates to be done remotely rather than just through our Wi-Fi at the offices, because obviously people weren't going there. We provided desks, we provided keyboards, monitors, chairs, you name it. And, you know, the list of suitable desks for different people were, you know, for people who were confined spaces, fold down desks, ones that are attached to your wall, do this, do that. I mean, it was a bit of an effort to try and do that, but it was worthwhile because within a matter of weeks, we had people happy at home. They had kit, they had systems, they had stresses, obviously, and that was what we were mindful of, is just trying to keep a track on people's well-being and try and keep as chilled as we could do in the circumstances. Obviously, you know, over time, other problems have come up. You know, we've had issues, I think, so I've seen some of Nick's tweets in the past about it, but VC fatigue, you know, the whole excitement of going on to VC to start off with, you know, everyone was on it constantly, and then by the second week you were sitting there going, geez, I've got a migraine, I've got headaches constantly, or just the fact that you're sick of seeing people on Teams all the time. Obviously the backgrounds were very innovative to start off with, and what proved a lot of good entertainment for a while, but but then you start looking at people's well-being and starting how you control what's expected of them and reduce their stresses. So we had this policy of do what you can when you can, working hours late in the day if you want to, in the evenings if it's around childcare arrangements or caring arrangements, or just because you're better in the morning like Nick is, or better in the afternoon like I am. Just be flexible. Yeah, there's some core activities you have to come together for training, for team meetings and things like that. Obviously, you can't pick and choose. There's certain things you have to do, but in general, be flexible. We told people to block off between 12 and 1 o'clock as just no meetings internally, just so people did get a break. Because the home working environment does lead you to sometimes forget about time or just continue to work longer hours. That's the other bit to be wary of. What else did we do? We asked people to take team-free days. I know, very difficult in the climate, but again, just be strong that we support you as managers and as leaders. Having days constantly interrupted, I'm sure we're all the same, having days constantly interrupted with video conferencing and catch-up calls and all these type of things, you end up getting nothing done, or otherwise working late into the evening just to try and get a piece of work done. So have a day of focus. And again, using some of the systems that we've got in place, there's My Analytics in there on Outlook, and there's some of the Office 365 gear that helps you sort of, control some of your diary if you need that, or nudge you in the right direction. So again, just trying to introduce some of these new sort of skill sets into people's lives. And again, a lot of this was all about making sure people were feeling cared for, and everyone in different situations. Some people are very happy at home, other people, like we say, lonely, vulnerable. And making sure we ramped up those calls to people. So we had a lot more coffee and chats. We had a lot more, not team meetings, but not say quizzes or things like that either, because that sounds a bit cheesy. But just those general well-being chats where people can just, in a big environment with their mates, in their teams, just talk about what they've been watching on Netflix, or what's been going on down the road, or bin collections. That's always exciting, isn't it? Who's been to the tip? Very, very exciting topics, but things that promote, as I say, those normal conversations you have in the office, and so trying to bring a bit of normality back to the situation. I think, there's so much more we could talk about, and I don't want to hog the chair here, but I think just looking ahead, just what will things look like for MSV moving forward? If we just move on to that. We're looking at 3 collaborative spaces, smaller versions of what we got now, but 3 spaces in different regions, just so people can go local to where they are, access it whenever they want to. And similar to others, having this whole flexible approach, so people have a choice of what they want. We're going to have a flexible futures offer. I think everyone's got their own flexible something offer as the way forward, but it's something for people to pick and choose what they want to do. We've got people who want to work from home. We've got people who want to come into the office. We've got those who want the mix. We want people who want to come in and collaborate, as I say, at certain times, and the people who just want to come in and see another face, that social interaction that everyone's missing. So our offer is all about what is there. It's a range of offers that people can just handpick, and what's convenient for them. And it can be, adaptable to, someone may choose something from day one and then think further down the line they want to pick and go to another offer. Fine. No, let's not make it hard for them. Let's, like Nick says, let's look at how we can make it an attractive place to work, so we retain people and don't lose people to Nick coming over the border from Yorkshire and Robin things from the Great Lancashire. It's what else I'm looking at? Sorry, I'm just going through a list here, just trying to get it all in. We got to look at offers, obviously, for things like operatives and things like that, because obviously, things like operatives don't have the same opportunities as home workers, but we can still offer them things like working 4 days, 5 days over 4, or different shifts, flexible shifts. So we've still got to iron that one out. Move to pure cloud-based systems for IT, digital channel switch, obviously on everyone's agenda if they've not done it already. Move to annualized hours, things like that. So again, that whole thing around culture and trust. Don't go back to the old ways where they were rubbish, where things were really crap. Let's not go back to those ways. Let's just really just be honest, say it was rubbish. Why were we doing that? Why were we involved in with those people? And just kick it into touch now and focus on what's important to us as a business. What is right for MSV? What do we really want to do? Let's focus on that rather than some of the crap we were picking up in the past, and it just became a habit, didn't it? Now's the time to break those habits. So go on.
Can we just move on to Jen? I'm just conscious of time.
Of course you can. Have I hogged too much?
Explore some of this. I'm just conscious of bringing Jane into the conversation before we get cut off. Jane, you're looking at this from a very much sort of an OD and HR perspective. So I guess you're quite busy at the moment. Is that fair to say, working with organisations on some of this? Really interested just to see some of the transformation work you've been doing, the types of conversations that you've been having with organisations. I think particularly, I mean, that context, some of the context that Siobhan set there around sort of policies and making sure people have the right things in place to protect themselves. So I'd be really interested to hear your take, and then Andy will come back if that's okay.
Okay, thanks, Bobby, and good to be here today with everybody. I'm similar to Siobhan, really, so sitting outside a specific organisation, a specific housing association, and supporting a number of organisations. I stepped outside a full-time role in housing association about 3 years ago and became independent. And I would go back to about 2012 when I first mooted in that organisation. Let's go agile. Let's be even more flexible than what we are already. I'd always benefited from having some time working from home alongside time in an office around other people, and was keen really to kind of exploit that for other people so it could fit in with whatever they had going on in their lives. And about that time I was met by colleagues, let's say finance colleagues, finance director, who was like, no, if people aren't sat at their desks from 8 o'clock in the morning when I arrive in and go home at 5:30, then they simply can't be working. They can't be productive, they can't be performing. And so introducing agile working around that time, you were up against some barriers. Kind of stepping outside of that organisation, I've continued to support others to gradually move to more flexible ways of working, agile, and transformation programmes. And I'll go back to November 2019, a conference I held with Housing Quality Network and 70 or so organisations in the room in Birmingham, all who'd travelled there, all who'd commuted there, and they were gradually moving to agile. They had the benefit of being able to think about what systems do we need in place, what kit do we need in place to be able to do that. And just like everyone around this table has said today, everything just got accelerated in February, didn't it? February, March. And I think since then, we have all been on a steep learning curve. Wherever you sit in an organisation, whatever level, this has hit the way that people work. And I agree that this is going to continue for much time to come. I think what we've been seeing is people going through that change curve, people going through that change process, probably over and over. So as an independent, when I looked at my diary in February last year, it just kind of emptied because all of my work was on site with clients. And we were thinking, how are we going to do learning? How are we going to do client visits? All of that sort of thing. So it can be a very worrying time for anybody. And then quickly we adapted. And we've been on that adaptation really since that time. So what I've been supporting organisations to do, because yes, while I think we want to use this as a disruptive experience to perhaps throw some policies up in the air and see what comes back, organisations have still been keen that they meet their duty of care to their employees. So want to put some backdrop in place for people. So there's some guidance, some frameworks of how this is going to look. So have some, albeit loose, albeit something that can flex with the time. Because let's be honest, I don't think in March last year we thought we'd still be here working from home to the extent that we are now. So people were thinking about sticking plasters really at first. And as time's gone by, we've put frameworks in place for organisations to support people around, does flexi time still apply? Do I need to log my hours? How does all of that work? Encouraging people to take time off now, which is a real challenge if they are working from home. So putting in place those frameworks and then picking up on other things that I've heard today, it has really been supporting managers in organisations, because I would have always said that the line manager role is critical. They're the person that team members see every single day. They are the culture of the organisation. They set the culture of the organisation day in, day out. And so I've been doing a lot of training with managers to help them to really make that shift to following the guidance that their leaders are keen to put in place of managing by trust, managing by outputs, trying to create, and I agree with you, Nick, we can be quite paternalistic organisations, very much parent and child. We might not think it, but the whole process that we put in place around disciplinary grievance, it can be quite paternal. So I've been supporting managers and leaders either through training or one-to-one coaching to move by managing by outputs on what performance they see rather than presenteeism, and really trying to move to that adult-adult relationship. I also see that not everybody is seeing the benefits of working remotely. I think you will get some people, like Jamie said, whose, for whatever reason, circumstances don't lend themselves to working from home 5 days a week. You know, it's a challenge for me who used to perhaps work from home 1 day, 2 days a week. I've got a full house of a 19-year-old, a 25-year-old, all trying to work from home, whether it's studies or furlough or whatever. It makes it hard. But I have this study. Some people might live and work in a one-bedroom flat. And I think what organisations will continue to need to do is think about people's environments. Is it suitable? If it's not, come up with some arrangements where they can work effectively, where they can feel well to work as well. Well-being will continue to be really important as we go through. I agree, Christmas, we were hoping that the new year would herald some hope for us about some semblance of normality, whatever that might look like. And then lockdown 3 probably seems a bit more negative. January and February are going to be tough. They're going to be tough for everybody. And whatever we can do as employers to support people, to have good conversations, look out for one another, I think can only be helpful. What I know is we can't snap back. We can't snap back to how things used to be. If you had invested in organisational change that you'd planned, prepared for, and you'd gone through it for a year, you wouldn't snap back to how things used to be. So why would you try and snap back to how things used to be before this? We've all been on a steep learning curve. We need to concentrate on continuing to build that digital skill set for people so they can interact on an equal playing field. They can get involved. I do think we need to think about technicians, operatives, and creating some flexibility for them as well, because otherwise, if they're not already, they might start to think, well, where's my flexibility? What's in it for me? So I think we should harness the movement and look to provide flexibility wherever we can, giving people choice and looking out for people's well-being.
Thanks so much for that, Jen. Again, there's some really, really brilliant insights in there, I think, from the conversations that I've been having, and I'm sure other people around the table have been having, that idea of snapping back and avoiding what I would call drift. is really important. And I think part of the challenge is when people don't quite know what the future looks like and where they're going, the natural thing is to us to drift back to how things were. So I think that's a really valid point. Steve, did you want to come in on that? Then there's a few questions.
There was just a couple of points that I wanted to just expand on, really, from what you said there, Jane. I think one of the things I discovered coming into the housing sector as a complete newbie, you know, starting with the company at the start of lockdown, I had a slight advantage in that I wasn't infected by the culture, if that's the right way to put it. So, you know, it did afford me the ability to kind of go, right, okay, I'm looking at this from a really objective perspective. You know, I'm taking the emotion out of it. But what I learned very, very quickly is there is no one size fits all. You've got to work with people on a one-to-one basis to understand their personal circumstances. And it's to your point, you know, we make a very, we're very guilty of stereotyping. You know, we assume that your 25-year-olds fresh out of university, they're all absolute whiz kids online. They'll be great working from home. When in actual fact, that cohort of people are social butterflies. They like interacting with people. They like socializing, building relationships and friendships at work. It's part of the reasons why they work. And they could, the chances are they're not on the property ladder. They're working off their apps in their bedrooms in their parents' house. So, you know, we've had to absolutely look at the different cohorts of people that we have in our organization. And that's why what we've done and has worked really well for us is we've come up with a program of various different options. So if you can't work from home, we've set up temporary office spaces for people. We even encourage people locally to source hot desks that may be available to them in their local area. If you know, if you don't want to work from home full time, we're encouraging for all our teams at least one day a week to come and work from our innovation hub, and then that way people can have those face-to-face interactions. So yeah, that was a really interesting learning curve for me. It was there is no one size fits all here. We're not going to be able to please everybody, but I think the most important thing is that leaders sit down and talk to their colleagues about what their setup is, what their circumstances are, and find a happy set of solutions to, you know, to keep people productive and safe.
Steve, I think that, sorry, Bobby, is it okay if I,
yeah, please go.
One of the things that actually we have found in the legal sector as a challenge, but I think you'd probably be in a similar boat in social housing, is the training of junior people. So there is an incredible benefit to sitting beside someone who is a senior person and hearing them on the phone or hearing them handle a situation, and you sort of learn that sort of learning by osmosis. So, you know, I think that there is a real sort of a bit of a change needed in that whole sort of learning and training angle of things. And just for the junior employees, one thing that we've become aware of and then had to address is, you know, this idea that we're talking about that people, you know, work all very flexibly. So some people are early birds and some people are sort of work better in the evenings. But what we were finding is that the junior people were feeling that they needed to be therefore available at all times. So, you know, if I'm a partner in the team and I'm working early because I've got 3 children at home to homeschool and someone else is working late because, you know, they decided to start a bit later, the juniors were feeling they also needed to be answering the emails at 7 a.m, but also 10 p.m. So I suppose it's about that sort of flexible working, but making sure that that's your personal flexible working, but it doesn't necessarily mean that perhaps, you know, someone reporting to you therefore needs to be available in this hugely wide window of time. So, you know, I think there's some particular sort of nuances around that need to be brought home to sort of the more junior members of staff.
Yeah.
I agree, Siobhan. Sorry, I'll just come in there. I agree, Siobhan. And in a housing context, I've worked with clients who've been trying to train customer service colleagues at this time. And that would be the way they would learn is by sitting next to one another. And Teams just hasn't been a substitute for that during this time. So they have needed to train in an office in a COVID-friendly way. And then there have been some simple solutions that organisations have come up with around their out of office to say, just because I'm sending this email at this time, it's because it suits my circumstances. Please I don't expect you to respond. And I think it is around leaders role modelling this type of behaviour to give others, particularly those who might be new to the business, who are trying to fit in, get on, get ahead in an organisation, understand the culture. So there is a big role that leaders can play in kind of giving people permission.
I think that's very right, and it brings me on to one of the questions I wanted to ask of the group. I was particularly interested in your point at the start, Nick, where actually at the first sort of phase of lockdown, a lot of this was driven by leadership and necessity, and like, this is how we're going to have to go. But actually, eventually, that conversation flipped, and it was your staff going back to you and saying, "No, this is what we want now." So I guess it's how much of where we go in the future is going to have to be driven by leadership, and how much is going to have to be driven by, well, how much will be driven by tenants and staff and their views. I think that's and where do we find that balance? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, on your experience so far, Nick.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because I think there's I get a sense there's a split happening. So I think in terms of organisations, and this is not just housing, but across the whole of business, there are some organisations that clearly are taking the view that they will just revert back to what we call BC timeline. So before COVID, but BC quite, in terms of future work, quite neatly fits as well. And I think there are others, and I think it's now an increasing majority, who are looking at a blended type approach, but have got no idea what that's going to look and feel like. And I think that's the whole thing about us all having to adapt and change to this. And I think for me, I think there's also a different view from customers as well. I think our customers have like us, accessed services in different ways and at different times, and have started to say, well, actually, I quite like that. Why shouldn't it be like that? And why shouldn't you be proactively contacting me using better CRM data that you've got? And because you know that, I might be shielding, so that I might need additional support at certain times. So I think also in terms of our some of our colleagues, I think that there's a risk at the moment, and I think it happens with every one of these conversations, and I'm as guilty as everybody else of doing it, but we slip back into thinking of looking at things as they are now and saying it's a straight choice between home or office. And actually, some of that conversation around how do you help people who are starting their career and whatever. When we get out of all of this, for me, I think there'll be much more of a blended approach, and there will be those opportunities. Why at the moment is Yorkshire Housing taking a really, really firm line on not opening our office, which is now interestingly up for sale anyway. But it's because the research in the British Medical Journal showed that the risk of transmission of the less virulent form of COVID was 19 times higher in an internal environment, in the same seating arrangement, internally versus externally. And as somebody who's got corporate responsibility for 650 people, I just felt that outweighed everything else. When you think that 1% of all people who contract COVID unfortunately die, and 3% have long-term debilitating conditions as a result, which doesn't get spoken about a lot. So once you start to sort of plug all those together, you start thinking, I need to think about this differently. However, I think we've got to not get distracted or get too fixated with how things are now. I think it's about looking ahead. And I think it was either Andy or Steve that mentioned about the fact that they've encouraged people to as grown-up adults, to find spaces to where they are if working at homes. And we're saving as a business a huge sum of money each month by not having our office open. And we're using a relatively small proportion of that saving to actually pay for these types of different spaces, which are more innovative and more exciting and better. But I think going forward, I think there's a conversation for the housing sector. So I've got people who are scattered across Yorkshire with GIS maps where all of our people live, which is really interesting. And I think there's a conversation for us to have with other housing associations to say, well, if some of my team are in your patch, can they drop in on a quid pro quo type arrangement? Or some might want some, because we're Yorkshire, some might want some cash. We're sensible with money in Yorkshire. But I think there's that whole thing about, I've mapped where different organisations have offices, and I've seen where I've got concentrations of staff, and I'm thinking, well, this is crazy. Why aren't we utilising some of that more and thinking a bit differently? So I do think that it will be driven by customers in terms of the service. And I think going back to the point, I think either Siobhan or Jane raised, so sorry, I can't remember, you mentioned about how there's a risk here of this excluding certain groups in the workforce. I want nothing more than our maintenance technicians to get out of this long-held mindset that they've had ingrained into them, that it's half 8 till half 4, and you don't work anything outside that, except if it's weekend and they're doing their own work in terms of, and then suddenly they're very flexible and multi-skilled and whatever else. I just think for me, it's for everybody in the business to sort of say, well, actually, how can we work in a different way, but with absolutely the focus on providing a much better, much more responsive and a much more customer focused service than we've currently got? Because at the moment, all of us in housing operate a pretty traditional 9 till half 4 type service offer. And it's just no longer relevant in 2021. The world, I think, has so significantly shifted. There will be a driver from customers, but I also think there'll be a big driver from our colleagues. And I think the driver from colleagues will be that they will walk with their feet if they are not happy. And I think, for me, I want to recruit, but also retain the very, very best people. Although I promise, Andy, I won't come and nick any of your staff, which you've sort of told to me before. But I think it will be an equally attractive proposition to people as salary, in terms of the flexibility that it offers.
Absolutely, we've always seen that. Sorry, Siobhan.
I was just going to say that I think the idea of shared office space is, well, obviously, that was beginning to take off anyway, with, say, city centres having a really nice, collaborative, interesting looking office space where you can get nice coffee and, chat to people, and that was maybe more for, people who had a very small business or something who could go to one of the hubs. But it is a very interesting idea, like the idea that, housing associations, for example, in an area could begin to share space. And it's not a sector where, there's huge competitiveness, I suppose, between, you're not competing for clients or work quite in the same way that some other sectors would be. So actually, the whole idea of, we're talking about being energized by seeing other people, that actually could work really well. And all the sort of cost savings around office space and things could still be achieved. So yeah, I think that feels like it's also getting on the back of something that was already beginning to happen, but might well be accelerated by COVID. Obviously, it depends on us all coming out of lockdown and actually being able to see people safely again. But assuming that will come at some point.
And I'm less convinced by that, and kind of, I say that interestingly, as somebody in our office, we've actually got a business lounge which we can share with partners, and it's sort of open for anyone can come in. It's not security controlled. There's a coffee machine, there's different spaces and plug points, and the idea being that other organisations that are working in the area can drop in there. You might see people. It would hopefully be lively. It hasn't been very lively yet, but I think like the idea that there'll be lots of hubs where you share space with other people, I just don't think is going to come to force, because what you want is connecting with your organisation. And the idea that I would rather commute 10 minutes down the road to be in an office with a load of people I don't know or don't work in common with, compared to commuting an hour to actually see the people I'm working with day by day, I don't think that's going to come to force. And I think, but I think lots of this is driven at the moment by where we are. And there was a survey published today by another communications agency, probably not in competition with you, Bobby, but I still won't mention them on tape, where it was, and there's a 52-48% split of people who choosing to stay work at home or return to the office, and 58% of the people choosing to work to home, it was because of a COVID-19 risk. And I think that is clearly going to change, hopefully quite soon, as the vaccinations rolled out. And I think then the focus becomes on what are the best bits of both, and what works well when you're doing one thing or another. And I think the thing that people haven't spoken about as much is the human impact of the face-to-face interaction. You were talking about junior members of staff. I think it's as much observing people as it's also the bits in between meetings, which have definitely been lost in Zoom and Teams, that you just press the red button and you're gone, instead of the walk to the lift where you actually have a debrief and you explain what that bit meant, or you sort of vent a little bit. And and we're human. It's that social interaction that makes us human. I think the big benefit for me of doing stuff online has been the ability to transmit information widely, simultaneously to lots of people. And we've done some really interesting stuff in like all staff broadcasts and kind of a giving information in, and you might have a one-on-one with different people, but it's not a group. And I think that's where you need people together.
Bobby, just on the sort of collaborative working and sharing space, I think just take it to another level is the interesting thing for me, and the frustrating thing for me is the fact that we're all doing the same things. We're all on the same journey, aren't we, in this sector? We've all got data issues, we've all got digital issues, we've got these flexible futures challenges ahead, sharing office spaces, all these type of things. Yet there's very little collaborative working together on it. We're all paying consultants and contractors and all kinds of people, service providers on an individual basis to solve our problems for us, but not collectively and collaboratively. And that for me is the bit that I find a bit frustrating at this moment in time. I think that's the real big question mark for me now moving ahead is, can we get better at it? Because, sometimes, in the past we've seen, particularly Nick, and I'm sorry for picking you out, Nick, but obviously we looked at your Houghton model in the good old days, and that's what sort of led us in the direction we're going in, and a number of other people have followed suit. But I just think it's frustrating for me that how much money do we probably waste as a sector on just doing our own thing, but actually we're all doing the same stuff. Why aren't we looking at getting the best value at what we do? Why aren't we looking at working together and seeking sort of joint ventures more than we are at the moment? And that's just a question just about there, because I just find it very frustrating. Just that's on the back of the sort of sharing office space. I think
Conversely to that, Andy, for someone like me who's come into this sector, I've worked in other public-private sectors. I think the housing sector is quite open. It's not as competitive. And what I've found is there is a real desire and willingness across the housing associations to communicate with each other, to listen to what each other's doing and to learn. It was really interesting when I first came in and rock up with my little briefcase, and I'm like, right, we're going to make flexible working work, and we're going to bulldoze our head office. We're going to do this, and we're going to make these firm commitments. I think half the sector thought, who the bloody hell's this guy? He's crazy. But in actual fact, now that we're into lockdown version 3, and we're reminding people of, well, this is what we're doing, so many more people are coming on that same journey now. So many more are thinking, actually, do you know what? I think we need to do the same. So I do think there is learning there. Sorry, my puppy's going mad. I do think there's definitely some learning there, and I think there's definitely a desire across the sector to share and learn, which is brilliant, really refreshing from my perspective when you're so used to working in a really competitive industry. But you're right, I think there is a need to probably break down those barriers a bit more and to invite each other into our organisations so that you can observe, you can give feedback, and you can also learn some new tricks as well. And that's partly what we're doing with our innovation hub. It's a space very similar to the concept that Nick's created at Halton. It's a collaborative space. It doesn't feel like an office because it isn't an office. It's all made up of different meeting spaces that people can go and collaborate depending on the size and nature of the meeting. But we've also intended to be somewhere that we can invite partners, we can invite other housing associations into it, so that we can basically showcase, this is what we do, this is the journey in the life of Johnny Johnson, and hopefully we can get that same knowledge from other housing associations as well.
Thanks, Steve. I'm conscious of time, so just to maybe start to wrap things up. First of all, thank you to everybody on the panel today. I think it's been a really rich discussion. I think we've unpacked a lot just looking at some of the notes I've made, and there's not really much time to go back through it all. But I think some of the themes have been that obviously this things can't be seen as binary. It's not just working from home or working from the office. There needs to be a blended and balanced approach, seems to be the themes that are coming out of it. The importance of culture is really, really important, and I guess what I'm hearing is that sort of the leadership to set the culture. but then we've got to listen to customers and we've got to listen to staff to help shape the future as well. Is, you know, everything's got to be involved in that. There's some really important stuff there from Siobhan, I think, to unpack on policies and employee monitoring and to monitoring how that goes. And again, another really big theme that's come out of the conversation has been the well-being of staff, which, you know, Andy and Jane have touched on in their conversations. And the role of managers again was really important, making sure that, you know, those people that are, if we don't have the visibility that we've always had, the culture that they set and how they deliver services is really important. So I think that's a snapshot. I'm sure there's lots and lots more that we've talked about that we could go back and revisit. But just as a parting thought, I was really interested in your take on what the office and what your organisations might look like in 2026, so 5 years from now. So just maybe a few quick thoughts just to summarise, and then we'll finish. So Jamie, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on what the future might hold for Network.
Yeah, I've got a really clear picture in my head of what our office will look like in 2026, of kind of like arriving at somewhere that's got lots of flexible different spaces in different places, of breakout booths, smaller pod spaces for people to work, focused work on their own, larger collaboration spaces, probably a big graffiti mural that says good homes make everything possible. I'm just describing our current office. I think we've designed it in a way that is flexible for the future, can be used in lots of different ways. And I think the passion that people that have gone back to it since July, people telling me they love it, I think tells me we're in a good place with that space.
Thanks, Jamie. Andy?
Interesting one, because I don't think I'm even sure with the plans that I've got in place now that it's fit for the next 6 months, let alone in 6 years' time, because I think it's just things are so changeable. I think just the principles of we want to remain flexible and adaptable to change. You know, we're ready to move with whatever we need to do as a business to cope and give the best offer we can to our staff. And as I say, the main thing for us is don't go back to the old ways. Let's just make sure, for whatever reason, we just avoid that, please. And that's the end of my lesson.
Andy. Steve, Johnny Johnson in 2026, where are we going?
I would like to think that everything we're doing now is still very much a relevant core part of our business moving forward. It's about having a flexible hybrid model, a hybrid model that fits any individual's personal circumstances. You know, it's not binary, and it's also a core part of our offer to colleagues. You know, when we talk about salary and actually it's people's motivations to join an organisation is not just salary these days, it is about the broader package that people get. I'd like to think that Johnny Johnson will be somewhere that attracts people for the whole package that we offer, not just the salary. It offers a family friendly and a personal experience for each and every colleague.
Thanks, Steve. And Jane, and then Siobhan, I guess what your expectations of what offices might look like in 5 years' time?
So rather than think about the office as a place, I'm going to think about how I want organisations to be in terms of their cultures. And I would say really maximising flexibility so they can be an inclusive place. One thing we haven't talked about already is how some demographics in workforces have actually lost out because of COVID. And what one group in particular is women who might have children of school age, and how that might have affected their career prospects, but broader than that, much broader than that. And rather than thinking about a place, although I'd like to be visiting housing associations that look like Jamie and Steve described, vibrant, where you can see collaboration happening, no more silo working, people know what others are doing, but an inclusive place to work.
Thanks, Jane. Siobhan?
Yeah, oh well, I just completely echo Jane's comments. I mean, I think if TLT could commission Jamie to come and create that nice office space for us, I think we'll have that. Thank you very much.
Come and work from our business lounge when you want. You can come and experience it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll as soon as COVID's over, I'll be there. Yeah, I do think that it's probably going to be a mixture in all reality of what people choosing how they work, but hopefully it's not just home or in the office, that there's lots of different options as well. I shall look forward to seeing how it all turns out.
Sure. And Nick?
I think similar, really. I think for us it's a blended approach based on that guiding principle of encouraging people to work closer to home but not at home, but interchanging between the sort of three options of hub, home and roam. But actually being treated like grown-up adults in terms of when they work, where they work and how they work, and them choosing what's right for them at certain times, but that being directly linked to providing a great customer experience. And I think for me, that's probably at the forefront of what should drive all of this.
Thanks so much, Nick. Thanks so much, everybody. I think we just about kept to time, just about. I'm conscious people have places to go. Nick, I'm delighted you got your dig in at Transpennine Trains early doors. That was a highlight for me. But yeah, I feel like there's lots and lots of conversations to continue with this. So thank you all again, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure, on the back of it.